I always assumed catastrophe would announce itself with noise. A slammed door, a raised voice, a confession forced out through guilt or fear. Instead, my marriage collapsed silently, delivered in a single image that arrived on my phone without warning. I had been going through emails during a late afternoon break when the notification appeared from an unfamiliar number. I opened it casually, expecting a wrong contact or an automated message. Instead, the screen filled with a photograph that knocked every thought out of my mind. It showed Emma, my wife, on a bed I had never seen. She was naked. Her body angled toward a man I did not recognize at that moment, though I would soon learn his name was Mark. His hand rested on her waist in a way that left nothing to interpretation. The intimacy in their posture wasn't impulsive or careless. It was practiced, familiar, comfortable. The type of closeness that only grows through repetition. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My entire perception of my life suspended itself, as if reality needed time to rearrange into something unrecognizable. I stared at the photograph until the shapes became abstract and meaningless, then sharpened into clarity again. A second message came. The sender identified herself as Laura, Mark's wife. She wrote that she had discovered months of hidden photographs, messages, and documents in her husband's cloud backup. She recognized Emma from social media and, after hours of internal debate, decided to contact me. She said she had more evidence and insisted we needed to meet. The numbness in my body began at my hands and spread upward. The office noises faded. My pulse hammered in my ears. I sat there for several minutes, unable to look away from the image. The familiarity of Emma's expression twisted everything inside me. She looked relaxed in the photograph. Content. As if she had left our entire life outside the room where the picture was taken. I replied to Laura and asked when she found everything. Her answer came within seconds. She had discovered the files the night before. She had not confronted Mark. She wanted to confirm the identity of the woman first, and once she matched Emma's profile, she sent the photograph to me. She asked to meet in person. I agreed without fully understanding why. Perhaps I needed someone else who had been struck by the same violence of discovery. Perhaps I needed to see proof with my own eyes rather than through an electronic screen. We met in a coffee shop on the opposite side of the city that evening. When I walked in, Laura was already there. She sat rigidly in the corner, fingers locked around a cup she wasn't drinking from. Her posture radiated exhaustion, and her eyes carried the same stunned hollowness I felt inside. Without needing formalities, she passed her phone across the table. What I saw stripped away the last fragments of denial. There were photographs taken in different locations, hotel rooms, rented apartments, parking lots, and once in the interior of Mark's car. The timestamps told a brutal story. Their affair had not been a sudden indulgence or a brief lapse in judgment. It had been sustained over months. The dates matched times Emma claimed she was traveling for work or visiting family. Paired with the images, every excuse she had given me became a neatly aligned piece of deception. Laura explained what led her to the discovery. She had noticed changes in Mark's habits, late nights, guarded phone behavior, unexplained absences. She ignored these signs initially, blaming them on stress. But her instincts eventually overcame her hesitation, and she searched through his old devices and backup accounts. What she found tore through her marriage the way the photograph tore through mine. For nearly an hour, we sat opposite each other, trading details that lined up with astonishing precision. Emma and Mark had constructed their deception with efficiency. They created overlapping lies, synchronized schedules, and routines designed to minimize suspicion. They communicated with a fluency that came from months of rehearsal. Then Laura showed me something that shifted my understanding of the situation entirely. She had found screenshots of bank transactions between Emma and Mark. The amounts were modest at first, then grew larger. Some transfers were disguised as reimbursements. Others were labeled as work-related costs. They had used shared resources, my income, her savings, to support parts of their secret relationship. The betrayal expanded from emotional and physical to financial and intentional. Their affair wasn't a side distraction. It had structure. It had maintenance. It had funding. Laura mentioned she had discovered a shared folder containing notes, written plans, possible future trips. Mark had scribbled short references to next steps and clean transitions. Emma responded with suggestions. There were references to long-term decisions, including leaving their marriages when circumstances aligned. Their relationship wasn't heading toward escape. It was preparing for construction. I felt something shift inside me, a tightening, a settling, an alignment of clarity. The pain didn't lessen, but it became directed. Focused. Laura and I reached the same conclusion without needing to say it out loud. Confronting them now would achieve nothing. They would deny everything, twist facts, destroy evidence, or find ways to manipulate the narrative. We needed a full picture before taking any action. We left the cafe with an understanding that formed without ceremony. We exchanged contact information. We would gather facts. We would verify timelines. We would uncover every detail of the structure our spouses had built behind our backs. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. We had been pushed into a darkness they created. The only way out was through careful illumination. That night, Emma returned home looking relaxed. She smiled, asked about dinner, moved around our apartment with familiar ease. Watching her felt surreal. Her casual movements carried a cruelty she didn't even realize she was performing. She hugged me briefly before bed. Her touch felt foreign. Over the next days, Laura and I uncovered more. GPS logs. Receipts. Hotel bookings under alternate names. Every discovery reinforced the same truth: Emma and Mark had not slipped, they had planned. The foundation of their secret life was expanding before us. The foundation of our alliance was forming alongside it. By the time the week ended, I no longer saw Emma as the person I married. I saw her as a version of herself she had hidden from me, a version that had grown roots without my awareness. Laura told me she felt the same about Mark. We didn't know then where the path would lead, but the direction was clear. We were no longer simply betrayed spouses. We were investigators in our own lives. And they had no idea their world was already unraveling. The week after my meeting with Laura moved with an unnerving combination of slowness and intensity, like watching a house burn behind soundproof glass. Outwardly, my routine remained intact. I went to work, responded to messages, completed tasks. But beneath the surface, my entire internal landscape shifted. Every action Emma took carried a new weight. Each time she checked her phone, each late-night email she claimed she had to send, each unexplained errand, all of it now looked like an extension of the double life she had been cultivating. Laura and I communicated frequently, not with frantic energy, but with methodical precision. Every exchange brought new information. Every piece of evidence she uncovered extended the timeline of the affair. A few days after our first meeting, she sent screenshots of a hidden messaging app Mark used under a secondary email address. The conversations between him and Emma revealed a level of familiarity that felt sickening. They did not speak like people caught in impulsive temptation. They spoke like partners shaping something long-term. One detail disturbed me more than the rest. Laura found a shared bank account registered under near-identical pseudonyms. This account contained months of transactions that lined up with the physical evidence we had already documented. Transfers for hotels, private car rentals, restaurant visits, groceries purchased outside of both our household budgets. Even small, mundane purchases indicated shared routines, snacks, drinks, small gifts exchanged between them. What unsettled me was not just the existence of the account, but the way it functioned. The money came from joint marital funds, siphoned in small increments. Emma had been extracting parts of our life, our home, our savings, the stability we built, and channeling them quietly into the world she built with Mark. Laura and I met again, this time at her apartment. She laid out the printed documents on her kitchen table like a map to a place neither of us wanted to visit again but had no choice but to explore. She moved with the composure of someone who refused to let chaos dictate the next steps. She had arranged everything chronologically: trips, charges, messages, notes, and patterns. What struck me most was how clean their structure looked when compiled. The affair had rhythm. It had coordination. It had planning. It was only hidden because Laura and I had never thought to look for something built with such depth. We followed their first meeting through the digital record. What seemed accidental in isolation turned calculated in sequence. Mark had written private notes months before they crossed the physical line. He described a growing fascination with Emma. He tracked her work schedule. He planned moments to encounter her. Laura found early drafts of messages he never sent, outlining the steps he intended to take. The affair, as it turned out, had not simply happened, it had been engineered. As we read through these details, something inside me shifted from hurt toward a colder understanding. Betrayal becomes more complicated when you see the architecture behind it. It wasn't just about desire. It was about intention. About two people quietly moving toward each other with purpose while pretending to maintain the lives they shared with us. Laura seemed to reach the same conclusion. She said she felt less like a wife discovering an affair and more like a witness uncovering a hidden operation. We both needed to process this, but we also knew we needed a plan. We couldn't confront them yet. Confrontation without complete proof would only give them an opportunity to erase evidence, adjust their story, or corner us emotionally. They were skilled at manipulation, their entire parallel life proved that. We agreed to monitor them closely, without changing our behavior in ways that might reveal suspicion. I returned home each day acting the same as before, though the way I saw Emma changed entirely. She seemed lighter in those days, almost relieved, as if she sensed the emotional distance I had created but misinterpreted it as disinterest rather than discovery. She spent more time outside the house, claiming work commitments. She left her phone unattended twice, which she had never done during the affair. Her newfound comfort told me she believed she had escaped consequences. Laura noticed similar shifts in Mark. He became careless, checking his messages more openly, returning home later than usual, appearing distracted but not anxious. Laura believed he sensed her emotional withdrawal and assumed she had pulled away on her own. That perceived freedom emboldened him. A week later, Laura sent me a message late at night. She had found travel dates marked in Mark's notes that matched a work trip Emma had mentioned to me earlier. The overlap was perfect. They were planning another meeting. This discovery became the gateway to a larger plan. We decided to subtly encourage their next meeting without showing suspicion. I became more withdrawn, deliberately quiet but not hostile. Laura did the same. The effect was immediate and predictable. Emma responded to my emotional absence with visible relief, as though she no longer needed to maintain a facade for my sake. She grew more eager to step out of the house, more attentive to her phone, more relaxed in her secrecy. Mark reacted similarly, giving Laura only half-hearted explanations for his absences. Once the date of the meeting was confirmed from both ends, we entered a new stage. For the first time, Laura and I took active steps toward dismantling their arrangement. We monitored their movements during the trip, not invasively, but through legally permissible means. Emma had granted consent to share her location through our family account years ago, and she never revoked it. Mark had a similar setting activated unintentionally. Their routes traced across the map like two lines drawn with the same hand. Laura and I followed from a distance, careful enough to avoid detection. When they arrived at the hotel, there was no need to see anything inside. The point was confirmation, not voyeurism. After verification, we left. That day marked the moment our investigation transformed into strategy. We were done collecting fragments. We needed a plan that would ensure the truth would destroy their constructed life beyond repair, without giving them the opportunity to twist anything. Over the next few days, Laura and I crafted a structure that grew more precise with every exchange. We knew they would not stop on their own. Their relationship had momentum. Their confidence had grown. They were building toward something larger, possibly a transition out of their marriages. We had to dismantle it all before they could make their move. As the plan formed, I realized that the person I had become was not someone who acted out of bitterness. It was someone who saw clearly for the first time in months. Betrayal creates a strange kind of focus. It removes illusions the way fire strips away varnish. What remained in me was not anger but certainty. Laura felt the same. She told me she no longer wanted simply to discover the truth. She wanted to ensure that their lives would collapse in a way they could not escape. By the end of the second week, our plan was no longer a reaction. It had become a controlled strategy. And the two people who believed they were operating undetected had no idea that everything they built was already in its final days. The transition from investigation to action felt almost natural, as if the situation itself pushed us toward the next step. Laura and I were no longer simply trying to understand what Mark and Emma had done, we were preparing to make sure they could not escape what they had built in secret. Our plan needed to be thorough enough that nothing could be dismissed or rewritten. The truth had to be undeniable, complete, and immediate. We began with the foundation. Before confronting them, we secured our own positions. Laura froze all joint accounts. I did the same with Emma. I redirected my paychecks into a separate account. Laura changed the locks on her digital banking access. We both collected the documents we needed for legal protection, financial records, screenshots, saved messages, photographs, housing documents, all sorted by date and category. It was not revenge. It was preparation for the collapse that would follow. The next phase required subtle emotional manipulation, not out of malice but out of necessity. If Emma and Mark believed their marriages were stable or reparable, they would become cautious. But if they believed their spouses had become distracted, uninvolved, or emotionally detached, they would feel emboldened. We needed them to behave openly, without suspicion, so that the final evidence could be obtained naturally. Emma interpreted my withdrawal as a sign of fading interest. This was evident in her behavior almost immediately. She stopped trying to hide when she stepped outside for long phone calls. She took more time getting ready before leaving the house. She spent more evenings out under vague explanations that once would have seemed suspicious but now felt like parts of a pattern she no longer cared to disguise. Laura saw the same changes in Mark. He seemed almost relieved by the emotional distance she presented. He left home for hours, came back with little explanation, and spent long stretches of time staring at his phone with a distracted expression. His mind was somewhere else entirely, locked into the future he and Emma had been preparing behind our backs. The plan's critical component required catching them in a moment where they felt the safest. That moment came sooner than expected. Laura found new messages in Mark's cloud backup, plans for another meeting, something longer than their usual encounters. He wanted a full afternoon with Emma, possibly even an overnight stay. Emma hinted at this when she told me she had a training session scheduled near the same date. Laura and I understood immediately, this meeting would be the one that broke their secrecy. We prepared accordingly. First, we compiled the evidence into an organized form. There would be no accusations, no emotional outbursts, no drawn-out attempts to extract confessions. The truth would be presented cleanly, with the precision of a documented case. Their own actions would serve as the confrontation, not our words. Next, we set up the monitoring, not invasive surveillance, but legally acceptable tracking through the existing location-sharing settings. Emma had granted access years ago when we were planning a hiking trip. She never bothered to revoke it. Mark had a similar oversight. Their routes were already visible to us without breaking any boundaries. The morning of the meeting, the map showed 2 location markers leaving their respective homes. Their paths followed predictable patterns. Emma said she was leaving for her training. Mark told Laura he had a conference call and needed space to focus. Their stories ran parallel, practiced and polished like everything else about their affair. Laura and I drove separately, maintaining distance so they wouldn't notice anything unusual. The location markers converged gradually, like 2 lines drawing toward the point where their deception would finally be exposed. The meeting place was a short-term rental apartment in a quiet neighborhood, one they had used before. Laura recognized the building immediately from previous receipts. When we arrived, we parked in different areas and walked past the building casually at different intervals to avoid appearing suspicious. Through a slight gap in the curtain of one ground-floor window, we saw movement, just enough to confirm they were both inside. We did not linger. We took photographs of their cars, timestamps of their arrival, and location logs synced to our devices. We waited for 20 minutes. Enough time for them to settle into a state where they felt relaxed and safe. Enough time for false confidence to take over. When we approached the building again, everything felt too still. I could hear my own pulse, though my expression remained steady. Laura walked slightly behind me, her posture rigid with controlled tension. We reached the door to the rental unit. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning detergent. The air felt heavy. Laura had discovered the access code for the unit in one of Mark's drafts. She entered it with steady fingers. The lock clicked open. Inside, Emma and Mark sat on a couch, fully dressed, but their closeness revealed everything. Their bodies angled toward each other, their knees nearly touching. Between them lay a stack of printed pages. I recognized the documents instantly: apartment listings, budget calculations, timelines for moving out of their marriages. They were not merely continuing their affair. They were organizing an actual life together. The moment they saw us standing in the doorway, every bit of color drained from their faces. Emma's mouth fell open slightly. Her hands trembled. Mark looked like someone who had been struck in the chest. The shock between them was almost tangible. We did not speak. There was no need. Instead, Laura and I placed our organized folders of evidence on the coffee table between them. GPS logs, bank transfers, photographs, receipts, timelines. Every detail of their double life arranged neatly before them. Emma stared at the papers as though they were burning her. She reached toward them with hesitation, then pulled her hand back as if touching them would make everything irrevocably real. Mark leaned forward slowly, his expression contorted with disbelief and panic, scanning the pages that revealed his lies with ruthless accuracy. They understood the truth immediately. Everything they had hidden was known. Every secret had been uncovered. Every plan they had made was now collapsing. Laura informed Mark of the frozen accounts, the ongoing legal steps, and the workplace investigations triggered by the misused funds. I told Emma the same. Their careers, their finances, their reputations, all compromised by their own choices. We left without giving them space to bargain or justify themselves. Their silence as we walked out told us everything about their future. Outside, the air felt cold and strangely clean. Laura stood near her car for a long moment, breathing deeply, steadying herself against the weight of what had just happened. When our eyes met, we both understood the same thing. The confrontation was complete. But the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The morning after the confrontation felt nothing like the explosive aftermath I once imagined. There was no storm of accusations or desperate attempts at repair. Instead, a deep and unsettling quiet filled the apartment, the kind that follows a natural disaster, when destruction has already happened, and the air seems to hold its breath in the debris. Emma moved like someone feeling her surroundings through a fog. She avoided me entirely, not out of anger but because she didn't know how to exist in a space where every lie had been stripped bare. She spent long stretches of time frozen at the dining table, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. Occasionally she held her head in her hands. The woman who once carried herself with certainty, with polish, with calculated calm, now looked like she had been split open. Whatever narrative she used to justify her affair had collapsed under the weight of the evidence. I didn't speak to her. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because there was nothing meaningful left to communicate. Words would only create noise where clarity was already absolute. Everything that mattered had been said without sound inside that rental apartment, when Emma looked at the evidence of her own choices and realized that nothing could be undone. Laura updated me throughout the day. Mark did not handle the confrontation with the same muted resignation Emma displayed. He spiraled almost immediately, rapid calls, frantic attempts to explain himself, unfocused pacing around their house. He tried to twist pieces of the situation into justifications, claiming Laura had misunderstood, claiming the months of evidence were misleading, claiming that the future he planned with Emma was an illusion or an emotional mistake. Laura did not respond. She wasn't seeking closure or confrontation. She had already spoken to her attorney that morning. By evening, Mark understood the gravity of what he faced, the loss of his marriage, the potential forfeiture of shared marital assets, and a looming professional disaster triggered by his misuse of company funds. The consequences came at him faster than he could process them. Laura later told me she watched him crumble, unable to reconcile how quickly his carefully balanced lies turned into a suffocating avalanche. Emma's reckoning came more quietly. Her first real collapse happened when she received the email she had been dreading all day. Her workplace had opened a formal investigation into financial discrepancies linked to her name. She had been unreachable during part of the afternoon, too paralyzed to respond immediately. When she finally gathered the courage to open the message fully, her hands shook so violently the spoon beside her cup rattled against the table. The investigation centered around expenses she falsely categorized as professional costs. Some of those transactions had been used to cover hotel stays with Mark. The discovery forced her department to suspend her. It was the first professional stain she had ever faced, and the weight of it crushed her sense of identity. Emma had always been meticulous about her image. She built her self-worth around her professional reputation and the respect it gave her. Losing that stability hit her harder than my silence ever could. I watched her stand by the window as the sun set, her silhouette motionless, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked small, like someone whose structure had been hollowed out. She left the room eventually without making eye contact, as if acknowledging my presence might break whatever fragile composure she still had left. She hadn't asked for forgiveness, not because she didn't want it, but because she knew she had no right to seek it. Meanwhile, Mark's consequences intensified. He was suspended within 48 hours, and his employer required a formal ethics hearing. Laura's attorney filed for separation immediately. She secured an emergency freeze on their joint assets to prevent Mark from pulling money out to stabilize his deteriorating situation. He packed his belongings into his car and moved into a rental on the outskirts of the city. Laura told me he looked defeated, like someone who finally understood that every path he had counted on had closed. Emma's illusion of a future with Mark dissolved even faster. She tried to reach him once, late at night, but he didn't answer. Laura later learned he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of his unraveling and couldn't even process Emma's call. He had prioritized self-preservation over the fantasy they once shared. The person Emma had dismantled her life for wasn't even willing to face her when reality intruded. That realization broke something inside her. The next morning, she packed a suitcase. She didn't tell me her plans. She didn't need to. She understood our marriage was already over. She understood I was no longer someone she had the right to approach with explanations or apologies. She left quietly, closing the door with a soft finality that felt more devastating than any argument could have been. The legal process moved forward with deliberate speed. The evidence Laura and I compiled eliminated nearly every route for Emma and Mark to dispute the facts. The financial records alone undercut any attempts to portray the affair as a momentary lapse. Emma lost her job permanently. Mark lost his position soon afterward. Both of them faced professional repercussions that followed them into every job application they attempted. Their relationship, once fueled by stolen moments and the thrill of secrecy, disintegrated under the weight of real consequences. They attempted to reconnect once, but the exchange was brief and strained. Without the adrenaline of deceit, without the structure of lies to hide behind, they had nothing binding them together. They were faced with their own brokenness, and neither one had the capacity to hold the other up. Their final separation happened without ceremony. Their future, once so carefully planned on those printed pages, dissolved into nothing. Laura finalized her divorce before I finalized mine. She moved into a new apartment and reclaimed her independence with a clarity that impressed me. She never tried to turn our alliance into anything beyond what it was. We remained connected, not romantically or out of trauma, but because we understood each other's experience in a way no one else could. I rebuilt my life slowly. I moved to a different place, restructured my finances, reconnected with old friends, and created new routines. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, quiet moments, waking up without tension in my chest, driving to work without replaying the betrayal, cooking dinner without thinking about the empty space beside me. Emma relocated as well. She took a lower-level administrative job in another town. Her social circle diminished. Her reputation carried the mark of her choices, and she faced the consequences daily. Mark continued struggling with the remnants of his career and financial losses. When their paths crossed months later, they looked past each other like strangers. They had destroyed their marriages chasing a fantasy, and what they found instead was a reality neither wanted. As for me, the experience reshaped my understanding of trust. The betrayal didn't define me, but it carved out a version of myself that saw clearer, lived straighter, and tolerated nothing built on secrecy. In the end, the truth didn't just expose their affair. It dismantled the illusion they believed would save them. And the final, lasting consequence wasn't the collapse of their lives. It was the permanence of everything they lost.